In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Please be seated. My grandmother hated dancing. She thought dancing was the work of the devil. She belonged to this really conservative church, and they didn't believe in dancing, they didn't believe in going to the movies, they didn't believe in music. And no wonder I'm so messed up. But they didn't believe in dancing because they thought it put thoughts in people's heads and other parts of their bodies. And they shouldn't have those thoughts. And Granny would say, the only dance is the dance of death. Because it was all bad. And her evidence for that, the scriptures today, King David and John the Baptist, for neither of them did dancing work out all that well. Now, it does, however, bear looking at what's going on in these passages to see how dancing fits into it at all and why Granny was wrong. Let's take a look for a second at King David. Yeah, Old Testament first. We'll take a look at that. In order to get a sense of what's going on with this, though, you got to understand a little bit of background, because the story, the way you get it today, doesn't make a lot of sense. Why is he going to bring the ark? Where is it coming from? Why is he stopping? You know, what's with all the dancing? So you gotta sort of go back a few decades, actually. The Ark of the Covenant, you know, has the Ten Commandments in it, and it's a sacred object for Jews. But in the days of the judges, before there were any kings, they would always have these battles, and in one of those things, the Philistines came and they stole the ark, took it back home with them, because it was supposed to be good luck. You know, you've seen Raiders of the Lost Ark. You know it's supposed to have all these powers and stuff. Well, they get it, they take it back home, and bad things start happening, plagues and things. And it doesn't take the Philistines very long to figure out that it's because of the ark, and they got to get rid of it. So they put it on an ox cart, and they send it back with extra gifts and say, here, sorry, our bad. And it goes as far as the house of a guy named Abinadab, who becomes the caretaker of the ark. I don't remember why, but he ends up being the caretaker of the ark, and it stays there for 20-some years. And in the course of this time, you know, kings come and kings go. Saul's king, then he's not. David's king, and David is the brand new king now. And he says, it's time to bring the ark home. So they go to Abinadab. They have another ox cart. They put the ark on there. He's got a guy named Ahiah up in front, another guy named Uzzah in the back. And they're sort of maintaining the ark. They're watching over it while they make their way to David's new capital city called Jerusalem, also known as the City of David. That's where the ark is going to go. Only problem is, at some point, Uzzah touches the ark. We don't know why, we don't know how, but he touches the ark and he drops dead. David assumes, and the writers say this is a sign from God that he touched it inappropriately and he should not have, and God got him. This, first of all, makes David really mad at God. He's like, why'd you do that for? Now you're messing up my beautiful entrance into the city. And then he gets scared because God can kill you if you start getting too upset. So he says, we're just going to park the ark right here. And they go to the house of a guy named Obed-Edom, and they give him the ark and say, you're in charge now. Now, Obed-Edom, depending on if you're reading from Chronicles or Samuel, he could be a Gentile who is also a believer in God, or he could be a Levite. Not really sure which. The scholars argue about it, and quite frankly, for our purposes today, I don't care. The point for us today is that he is left to guard this ark. And while he's guarding it, while it is residing in his home, life is good for Obed-Edom. Everything works out beautifully for him. He becomes the luckiest guy in the world. You know, he can't plant something and it doesn't grow beautifully. Everything's marvelous for him. David hears word of this and he says, I got to get me some of that. I got to have some of this. And he decides God has called him to go and actually bring the ark all the way into the city of David. So they come back out. Now, the first time when they're getting it from Abinadab and they're on the way, he's bringing 30,000 people, and everybody is dancing in front of the ark except for Ahiah and Uzzah. But this next time, and you'll notice that the stuff about Uzzah getting killed, that's not in your reading for today. Sort of just blocked that part out. You look at it and you'll see that there's several verses missing. That's what that was. Anyway, so now David's going back. And it says this time that only David is dancing as they bring the ark into Jerusalem. But everybody's happy. David's dancing wildly. And from a window up above, his wife, Michal, looks down. And she despises him in her heart. Which seems like an odd thing to do for somebody who's just dancing, doesn't it? We're going to get back to this story in a moment about what happened with all this dancing and why she would despise him. But before we get to that part, let's look at the gospel where there's another dancing story going on here. And I'm going to make a name change for you. You'll notice in the way you read it, it said his daughter Herodias. You see, you look at that. See how it says that? That's one translation and probably not the right one. Herodias is the name of the woman that Herod marries, who happens to be his sister-in-law married to Herod's brother Philip. You got that? Yeah, it's confusing because it's sort of like Downton Abbey except in Israel. At any rate, Herod basically steals the wife of his brother and marries her, even though his brother's still alive. She's got a daughter, and her name is either Herodias Jr. or, according to the historian Josephus, Salome. And Salome is the name people are more familiar with. It sounds salacious, doesn't it? And if you ever watched an old movie called King of Kings, you see this scene in that movie where Salome dances for Herod and for his buddies. It's this scene that we have in today's gospel. And in that scene, she's this, voluptuous 20-something-year-old, and she's doing just this most seductive dance you can do, and everybody's like gaga. And he's like, oh, anything you want, Salome. Yeah, that didn't happen. That's not what happened. That's Hollywood. And that's also guys kind of being jerks in a lot of ways. The word that's used in the gospel to describe Salome, and I'll keep using the name Salome. The word used to describe her is the exact same word used to describe Jairus' daughter. Remember a few weeks ago we had Jairus, that guy who had this little girl who was sick and on the point of death? Remember that one? And Jesus goes and heals her and actually raises her from death. Remember that story? How old is she? Remember? Now I'm sad. No, 12. The word stands for a preteen. This is a little girl we're talking about. The dance that she's doing, the word for dance in this passage is the exact same word that Jesus uses when he talks about how people don't accept who he is. Remember, at one point he says, we piped for you and you would not dance. And he's talking about the children. It is a childish play kind of a dance. This is a young kid dancing for her father. And why would she do that? Because she's the child of royalty. And in those days, the children of royalty had the obligation of entertaining the company. Again, if you ever watch Downton Abbey, you see, or if you ever follow any of these shows with royals and stuff, the kids have to play the piano and do that stuff for the company. That's kind of what this is. So it has nothing to do with the dancing that drove all the men crazy. Rather, more likely, this scene has a lot to do with these guys, and the way they did these banquets is one of the first things they got was beer and wine. there's a very good likelihood that Herod's making this outrageous, lavish promise to her because he's drunk. And she, as this young girl, goes to her mother and says, what should I ask for? And Mom, who's always hated John, she says, now I got it. Now I know how to get rid of the guy. The point being, though, and this is where Granny steps back in. My granny would say, see, that proves that dancing leads to death. It led to the death of the marriage for David and Michael. And it led to the death of the innocence for that girl. And it led to the death of John the Baptist. Dancing is for death. Or is it? What if dancing itself had nothing to do with these two stories of death? Why would Michael, for example, be so upset with David just because he's dancing? Possibly because she had other reasons to hate him. Think about her story. First thing you got to know about her is that she was a prize. She was given to David by her father, Saul, who was the king at the time, because David killed a lot of people. The right people, as it turns out. David was a good warrior. And Saul said, hey, you should have my daughter as your wife because you're a good warrior. Do you think he asked her if she thought that was a good idea? That's step one. Step two. David is the brand new king of Israel. Do you know why? Because he just defeated her father Saul in battle. Not only did he just defeat her father Saul in battle, but Saul is killed in that battle, and so is her brother Jonathan. That has got to make for awkward dinner conversation. Another reason, perhaps, is because as David is dancing, what seems to get her so upset, and it's just a couple of verses after our story ends, she gets really snarky, really sarcastic, and says, oh, there you are, dancing half naked in front of all the servant girls. It just might be possible that she's a little bit jealous. And it also might be possible that she knows that David doesn't really care what she thinks. Because his response to her is, woman, I'll dance if I want to dance. So there's a lot going on that has nothing to do with the dancing before the Ark of the Covenant at all. But the dancing becomes the focus. Going back to Salome, the dancing is the focus. You see that in the movie, right? But what is going on? A, Dad's drunk. B, Mom hates John the Baptist and sees an opportunity. Has nothing to do with this dance. It has to do with what other people are doing. And what is the point in all of this? What kind of lesson can we draw out of this? Yeah, sure, the dancing's not necessarily that bad. One of the problems with situations like this is that we have them all the time. Every day we have situations where people are put to shame for something they do because it bothers other people. You know, I follow a lot of social media, so just this week, there was a woman, there was a video of this woman. She was shooting the video as an act of defense. She's wearing a shirt that has the Puerto Rican flag on it because she's from Puerto Rico. And this guy, she's at a what do you call it, a pavilion at a park that she's rented for a party. And as her friends are gathering, this guy comes up and starts yelling at her and starts assaulting her because she has this foreign flag on her shirt. Now, if you know anything about America, you know that Puerto Rico is what? Territory. Yeah. Every Puerto Rican citizen is a U.S. citizen. And the guy will have none of it, so he just keeps harassing her and harassing her and harassing her. And there's a cop, and the cop says, I'm not touching this one. And he never steps in. These sorts of things happen. She's wearing something perfectly fine to wear, but somebody else gets upset about it. It's just like Granny saying, look at all that dancing. No, it leads to the bad stuff. Every single day in the news, you're going to see stories where someone is doing something innocent and they are accosted or abused. You've heard of the Me Too movement, right? The hashtag Me Too, of women telling their stories of being abused or harassed sexually simply because of who they are. I have a lot of colleagues who have told me their own stories. And one of the weirdest things that they have to deal with when they sort of tell these stories to somebody, especially if they have to go to the authorities and tell them, is they say, okay, well, what were you wearing? As if that mattered. But the implication is you deserved it because you were wearing something that was seductive or provocative. And the answer, of course, is no, it doesn't really matter what I'm wearing. There was a story yesterday, the most recent one that I can think of, is a story of an 11-year-old boy who's African American, and he has a paper route, right? Now, there aren't that many paper routes left in the world. He's got a paper route, and he's going up onto porches, and he's putting the papers down there, and because he's brand new at it, he missed one, and he had to go back and grab one that he put on the wrong porch and go put it on there. And as he's doing that, a cop comes up to him. And he says, somebody called, and they were afraid of you. The kid's doing something that used to be the American way. I had a paper route. You know, I used to actually have to go into people's homes to deliver their papers at 5:30 in the morning. I mean, you can say, well, it was a different time, but this was in the afternoon. And he's just going on the porches. And somebody calls the cops on him. What he was doing bothered them. And it had not a lot to do with the fact that he was a paper boy. They'd had paper boys there before. But that he was black. And that was the excuse to get at him. One of the problems in our world back then and today is that seemingly innocuous things, maybe even good things, can be attacked. And they have nothing to do with us in particular. They have to do with the people who are doing the attacking. People who are acting on how we look, or how we dress, or how we sing, or how we dance. And they use that as an excuse to act out their own stuff, to intimidate us, to put us down. And we have a couple of choices. One choice, keep dancing. Another choice is to be shut down, to stop. But if you stop dancing outwardly, there's a real good likelihood you'll stop dancing inwardly. That something inside will be pushed down and trapped. We cannot allow that to happen as followers of Christ. As followers of Christ, we are called to live God's love and live it loud. To be the people through whom the light of Christ shines. To be the people through whom the Word of God shouts out. That's who we are called. We are called to dance. And no, I don't mean literally, because you just don't want to see me do that. But to dance in our souls and to let the world see it. That may be going out to a protest and standing up for justice. At the General Convention the last 2 weeks, all of the delegates, 1,000 delegates, went out and held a Eucharist in front of one of the detention centers that they are holding all these mothers who'd been separated from their children, these immigrant mothers. And they couldn't get too close, but our presiding bishop preached, and they said, we will not be silenced. This is wrong. And then they left because they couldn't get any closer and because the guards were sort of threatening them, so they left. But they got word later from a lawyer that the women were all glued to their windows watching. And they said, we know we're not alone. Thank you. We, as followers of Christ, cannot allow ourselves to be stopped from dancing. Nor can we stop others from dancing, or speaking, or wearing whatever it is they need to wear, or expressing the joy and the love of God in whatever way is good and right and holy. We cannot allow that joy to stop. I think Granny, looking down from heaven, which I have to assume she is, would look at us and see us dancing or speaking or singing, and she'd say, you know what? I'm okay with that after all. Amen.